So I get the pleasure and privilege today of introducing our speaker, who just happens to be the other half of my heart, and coming from someone who knows him best, I think. So I thought about how to describe David. The first thing that came to mind is grateful, because everywhere we go, I don't care where we are, he thanks people all day long. Maybe we're in a restaurant, he always thanks people for their service, but we might be checking out of a store and he thanks them for their service, and sometimes people get this really surprised look on their face because they're really not used to being thanked very much. Secondly, I think he is the king of reframing any situation to make it positive, and he's been really a wonderful example for me. He can take anything that we might consider that was probably a bad thing that just happened, and he immediately, within seconds, can turn that into whatever was good in that situation. Non-stop. It never ceases to amaze me that he is the king of reframing. He's also really playful, and he's a poet, and he writes spiritual poetry. That song that I wrote came from a poem that he wrote. And on a physical level, many of you may have known him when he worked at the Heritage store. Now it's Heritage Natural Market that sold the Casey products, Edgar Casey products, and he worked there for well over 30 years. He was the catalog manager for that store, and he helped thousands of people with health problems with the Edgar Casey products. But he kind of got a little bored of doing all the physical stuff and wanted to move more into the spiritual stuff, and he got very much involved with the Glad Helpers prayer group. And he moved on to work at ARE. He was formerly the membership manager, and later he oversaw the Glad Helpers and the study group department at ARE. And when all along when we've been together, when people ask David when they meet him, he'll say his name and then they go, "What do you do?" He would never answer his job or what he was doing. He would say, "I'm a glad helper." And very often, again, people's eyes would get a little bit because they did not know what glad helpers was, and he had to tell them, "Maybe you want to explain what that is, honey." So he was very involved with the Glad Helpers prayer group, and so his answer was never what he did, but what he was. And today we've prayed for the perfect people to be here today to hear whatever message it is that David is going to talk about, and he speaks totally from the heart, and he follows Spirit. And that means I have absolutely no idea what he's actually going to say, even though he's been working on this for months. So I'll just be as surprised as all of you. So please welcome my honey and your speaker for today, David Riblet.
Welcome. Oh, so grateful you're here today. It's not about what I'm going to say today, though. It's going to be what's meaningful to you, because I have tried to let myself be a channel for the things that will touch your heart. Now, one of the things Jesus did in his time, and I'll get to this a little later in more detail, but he planted heart seeds. He planted seeds in people's heart. And those seeds were started 2,000 years ago, but they're growing today. And so each person has their own evolution and their own journey. To talk about this appropriately, I have to actually tell you about some of my journey. And so blessed. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. And Susan, thank you for putting in what were the Paul Solomon readings today, because that specifically was about Christ consciousness and it being mystical. And that spoke to me. So I got into this 18 years ago, totally not expecting this. If you had asked me that I would be up here today talking about Jesus and the messages through John, and I would have told you you're nuts. Okay? Positively, I would have told you something like that. But let me first read another poem that I wrote, and I'll close with the poem too. My idea today is that we're reclaiming Eden. but we were there once, and how are we going to get there again? And what is my journey in it? The first poem I'm going to read today is called Affinity. An affinity for the messages of John, Spirit expanding through him, Spirit expanding through me, consciousness resonating to love. What greater teachings than these, mirroring the words of the masters? Ancient energies now walking on earth, steering the ship ever forward, unaffected by increasingly strong winds. Positive change blowing across the seascape, rather like a snake shedding its skin, transmuting misguided thoughts into pearls. Bewildering to some these currents, man's seeming despair unveiling the face of God, beaming light into mortal hearts, transfixing experience spreading like wildfire, fanning a diverse group metamorphosis, humanity joyfully reconnecting with the Christ consciousness. We are one soul family expanding together, Spirit expanding through us. We are transfiguring love. This is very personal to me. When I started out asking what my purpose was. Well, I got in the Heritage Center in the Heritage Store and went up to the biomat in the center and laid down. And I asked what my purpose was. And I didn't just ask it one time, I asked it again and again. And I laid there for 2 hours. And as I lay there, I saw a little image, and it went away. Okay, I'm observing, experiencing. And I saw a slightly larger image, and it went away. And then the third time I saw what it was a golden image of Jesus, and it went away. The fourth time, though, it stayed. And that was the start of my journey back to that Christ consciousness, which is what the Glad Helpers pray for. And it's a consciousness that if we live, our world changes. And that's what happened with me. So little did I expect to have this experience. I walked away. I said, okay. Other things happened. And actually, it was the day of August 12th, and someone I worked with named John Wigmore, for any of the Heritage employees, he passed away. We didn't know it. He was at home. I was walking the beach with my youngest son, Kyle, and I looked over at the shoreline, and I saw the shoreline like we had just landed hundreds of years ago, what it looked like. And there were hundreds of crabs walking the beach and tens of thousands of clams. And then I was given another gift, because later that day I walked into Farm Fresh and met Cheryl. And I saw her spirit the very first day. Talk about a mystical, magical day. And later I was to find that Kyle was in the scene just like I was. Didn't find that till about 6 years ago. So all these pieces of this story, they fit together. It's a little hard in 30 minutes to get there perfectly in order, so bear with me if I move around a little bit. We found out the next day that John Wigmore had died. I was at work, and Mariana Keller was there, who many of you know from being here. She was a minister here. So was her husband, Thomas. And I told her it was love, not fear, and I had to get out of the store. I had no idea what I was going to say that day, but it was better that I didn't say it around anyone else. So what did I do? I went down to the garden at ARE, and I read Revelations, which I had never read. And those were the messages through John 2. So there's a reason that I moved through this journey of mine, step by step. It took me a while to get together with my soul partner still, my heart mate, my one heart. But it was all for a reason, and I continued to have these experiences. So where does one take something that's larger than the life you're walking through? Well, you just kind of got to follow along and trust. And so along the way, I went to Angela Jones's birthday party, Jeff Jones's mom. Angela, happy birthday month, because it was also November. And it was with Elizabeth Merrick, who's also was a member here. So my journey has a lot of fellowship people involved in it. And then I went to Kay Sturgis, who's another fellowship person, and I had a regression. And this further transformed my life. Because in the regression, Kay asked me, where'd you go? And I said, I saw a man in sandals, and his name was John. Now, there are a lot of Johns back then, and I have had the blessing of being able to channel the messages of John. But it was a time period that was to speak to me. It was the time of Jesus. Jesus was in the scene. Jesus was prepared for the role he was in by the Essenes. My understanding is about for 300 years. And the Essenes came and they held that space to create the space for Jesus to come in and be the Jesus that we got changed by. And that's a long time. Think of a group like the Fellowship getting together with a mission, a soul family, and deciding, we're going to hold this energy. And through generation after generation and generation, they stick to it. And it becomes what it becomes. Now, this is actually one of my favorite parts, because how did Jesus get there? He came in through Mary. I've seen Mary called Mother Mary full of grace. And that's true. But when I thought about it for this talk, she was the vessel for Jesus. So really, when we think of grace, grace came in through Mary. And grace is something we have and we're still moving to. There was someone I was speaking to in the last month who said, someone was perfect. First they said they are love. Then they said they are perfect. And then they said they are whole. And that really spoke to me, because I am perfect. I am love. And I am whole. And each and every one of you is love. And you are perfect. And you are whole. And Jesus came in and manifested love among many other vibrations as part of his Christ consciousness. So we often think of Jesus as, oh, Jesus came in and he did this, he did that. He did it with a team. He did it with a team who came in to be around him. That team, now I have to step back a moment, because that team did not start with Jesus. At least according to the readings of Edgar Casey, They're the past lives of Jesus. And those lives started well before he came in with Jesus. Did Jesus learn to be Jesus when he came in to be Jesus? I think maybe you could say he did, and that's perfectly fine, because I think anything someone believes and is true to them, that's true to them. But this actually goes back to the creation story of, and this book, by the way, is by Glenn Sandifer, and it's in the Airy bookstore. It goes back to the creation story of, it goes back to God, and when mankind wasn't in the human body in earth yet, and it actually goes back to an incarnation which was spirit and not in the physical, of a soul called Emilius, who was the forerunner of Jesus. And there were also a lot going on earth where other souls were coming in and playing around with the energy of the earth and getting trapped in the physical, sometimes in bodies with fur, with feathers, with hooves. This goes back to the Casey readings. And it goes back to a time where the planet was not in the shape that we needed to get to. Well, it didn't work the way that Emilius thought it would, because they tried to help people, and they weren't able to the way they want. So they stepped back and were working with God again. And Emilius then became Adam. And with Adam was Eve. And they had it together first, and they were listening to God, and they had not eaten the fruit of the garden yet. But that is why I call this Reclaiming Eden, because we do go back to Eden, but we have to go forward to Eden as well. And God sent them as Adam and Eve. And my understanding through the book is that Eve later became Mary when it came that time again when Jesus was going to walk on the earth. There were a lot of lifetimes in there, and I don't want to go into the details, because even though I find it fascinating, I think that it's worth reading the book if you're interested enough to find out. Again, it's called The Past Lives. Edgar Casey's Past Lives of Jesus, an amazing story. There never was a time when there wasn't a Christ. There was never a time where there wasn't a Christ Mass. And so here we are now, the fallen out of Eden, and when was the way back? And that's a lot of the past lives. But I'll mention a few of them, because there was Enoch, which people have run into in the Bible. There was Hermes, who actually was the builder of the Great Pyramid, and also, my understanding, called Thoth. There was Melchizedek. Both Enoch and Melchizedek came in and served within the consciousness body that would later become the Christ. But neither one of them experienced having to die. They came in, and then when they left without having to go through what everybody goes through now, which is birth and death. But those were all stages of Jesus walking through, where Emilius, through Adam, later to be Jesus, walking through experiences on earth to get to the point where he was Jesus. So this is where it gets more personal for me, because it's when I remembered Gethsemane, and I remembered other things that came through the messages of John. There were events up to Gethsemane that I remember through access to what John was feeling. And what John was feeling, for instance, in the Last Supper, Jesus actually took time and washed people's feet. What did it feel like to a disciple to have their feet washed? Well, the poem I had said would do anything for him. And he's doing this for us. It felt so wrong. If you think about the people at that time, you were looking for a savior. And the disciples were looking for a warrior king. They actually wanted someone who was going to overthrow Rome. And that wasn't what Jesus came in to do. He came in as a consciousness. This is really a story of consciousness, not a story of a human body. So they came in, the disciples wanting him to be different than he was. Well, we saw how well that worked, right? And John and Peter and James also were with Jesus when he went up to talk to God the last time. And they were there for support, but they weren't supposed to stay away. So there was Jesus with some of his whole family. And Jesus got a one-on-one with God, because Jesus had come down to basically go through life, correct for the mistakes in the past lives that had gone on when he was in the other timelines, come up and intercede for humanity with God. And that was a pretty rough road. And actually, I still get broken up by it, because being connected to that consciousness, that wasn't what anybody at that time who were followers of Jesus wanted. So Jesus had his one-on-one with God, and he talked to him, and he said, "Do you really want me to do this?" "Well, yeah." "Do you really want me to do this?" "Well, yeah." And finally accepted that you really want me to do this, so I'll do it. And Jesus and John and James and Peter walked down to the garden, and Judas, who had agreed ahead of time as part of the Soul family to be the one who showed the Romans that this was Jesus. Judas did his unthankful task to Judas, because when we're alive on earth and we have what goes on, we don't necessarily see the higher realms of what actually happened and what's going to happen. So Gethsemane happened, the resurrection happened. We're 3 days after Jesus was crucified on the cross. Now, fortunately, the disciples had been around all the teachings for a very long time. They hadn't quite got it. I'm going to say this a little lightly. The women who were with Jesus got it a lot better than the disciples, because they were listening from their heart. And Jesus was talking to people as an example of consciousness, and people, a lot of them weren't ready for it yet. And even now, as we're on earth today, walking around, and we look at things that are going on in 3D, what's going on here? Well, let's hold on a minute and stay above that. One of the things that was left out of the Bible was the gospel of the beloved companion. It's the complete gospel of Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene and the other women were receiving Jesus's heart seeds somewhat differently. The disciples were too, but they were trying to take those heart seeds and make them what they wanted to see. Perfectly understandable. People do the same thing today. So anyway, the first one of the 8 couplets of Mary Magdalene is love and compassion. Jesus, we are love, we are perfect, we are whole. The last one is grace and beauty of the Spirit. And we really are walking in grace every day. And that grace is something that our heart seeds are still growing into. So how do we get there? Well, actually, I'd offer to you, like I offered to myself, I got here through my journey. I got here through my journey in this life, and I got here through my journey in all the other lives I've had. And I would say to you that you're getting there in this life, through what you're doing in this life. If that's what you think of as the height of the consciousness, that's a perfectly fine height of consciousness. If the other lives are considered into it as well, we're all a composite of those other lives and who we are today, and what we're trying to do and what we've learned. So, okay. I think it's enough for now, except for where we're going. And another poem, which is also Reclaiming Eden. I think where we're going is there's not a separation between Jesus and Mary. There never was. They were both grace. They were both love. They both came to earth as part of a soul family to do a great mystical adventure for people to claim and to grow into. I think our consciousness is going to become more of what we originally intended when we came down to earth the very first time. And we're meant to live it, and we're meant to grow into it. And this is Reclaiming Eden. I wrote this March 17th, 8 months ago today. There comes a time to reclaim Eden. That time is now. Long our garden planet, sorely we have missed her, buried far below the scandalous cloud cover. The good news, hidden, but not gone. We have patiently awaited for consciousness to return. Did it have to fall so low? Perhaps, perhaps not. The shift takes place in levels far removed from us. We are the gatekeepers from on high, the tableau arranged beneath us, patterns forming, receding, and reforming, seeking just the right combination to move forward. This process continues ceaselessly. Then one day, fruition recognizes it is now. The tumblers unspool, the lock is sprung, the pathway emerges clear and bright. We have longed for this day, so longed. The scars will heal as new life force strengthens. That which it touches hungrily absorbs it deeply, like elementals rebirth each spring but to scale. For there is spring and there is spring. The Eden that was now wiser by many evolutions, resolving to be uplifted, it is uplifted, dissolving to resolve the current state of our union. We will look back on this opening of the garden gate, the population unsure of just what happened, accelerating through portals up paths, revisiting Aether's past long untraveled. Rejoice and be light. No longer it is the time of weal and woe. Now the elevated realms of song and praise, all present, have reclaimed the Garden of Eden. Thank you, and I hope something in here touches the heart seed that is in your heart. And you do in your journey what you are meant to do, because this is about so much more than me. And it is about so much more even than Jesus, who is the template for what we are becoming of the Christ consciousness. Thank you.